Yeah, I think part of the reason why it's happening on these other platforms is largely based on how they're monetizing. And so, very simply, as predominantly advertising revenue models, they are incentivized to keep users in feeds as long as possible, right? There's a direct correlation between how much time they're spending in feeds and the revenue being generated for these companies. Unfortunately, the things that keep us in feeds longest happen to be the very things that are most damaging to us.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host Marc Verbenkov's Deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 188. Social media platforms are among the most powerful forces shaping our mental health, relationships, and even our worldview. But what happens when you try to build a platform from scratch that focuses on authentic, meaningful experiences instead of endless scrolling and superficial engagement? In this episode, Marc speaks with Andrew about the evolution of a new kind of social media platform, one built not around clicks and ads, but around authenticity and shared human experience. They explore the platform's roots in contextual commerce, its shift toward mental health conscious design, and how AI is being used to support meaningful behavior instead of addictive engagement. The conversation covers the problem of negative reward systems, potential safeguards against platform misuse, and the long-term vision for a more values-aligned digital community. They also discuss the possibility of crowdfunding and the emerging role of community rounds in platform development. Andrew Christodoulides is a seasoned entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience. His first venture, Asina, a B2B outsourcing startup, began with $500 from his parents' basement and was acquired by a strategic partner. He went on to create Original Pad, an e-commerce platform that redefined home decor shopping. Andrew then founded We Live Incorporated, which evolved from a contextualized search platform to Applaudable, a social media platform focused on meaningful storytelling and celebrating life's impactful moments.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today. It's good to have you're out in Barcelona, so it's good to be tied back to where I was for several years, and interested to hear what you guys have going on.
Yeah, sounds good. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, you're working on a new social media platform. We mentioned right before recording that there's quite a long history or an anecdote that brought you into this world. If you could share, some aspect of that, I think it would be quite interesting for myself and the audience as to why you created one, because I think there's generally the people that I've interviewed that are doing something like this, they have quite a unique perspective on why this is needed, whereas most of us are just kind of using these platforms without thinking about it too much.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think there are a couple of different ways that we arrived here, and it happened to be at a very ideal time based on, I think, all-time high dissatisfaction with the big platforms that everybody's using and, consensus around the negative mental health effects, especially among younger users. So the short answer to how we got here is we started a completely different business and it evolved into this. We were in I was in an e-com focused on mid to higher end home furnishings.
Okay.
And it's an interesting category because it's not represented by recognizable brands the way every other consumer product category on the planet is. And so when you couple that with the relatively high ticket nature of the products,
Hmm.
it makes it hard to convert customers through digital channels. And so we were dealing with that for a while, and we had come up with a concept to address that problem, which was contextualization. We thought, we would build what we call the contextualized search and shopping experience for home furnishings, whereby we were curating photos of real people's homes, and we had built some tech to identify the objects in those photos, and we had turned that into a search and shopping experience where you could essentially find what you're looking for through photos of people's homes and then buy them right from those photos. The short of that is, at some point we realized that the same way we were acquiring users and getting them to share personal experiences, which at that point was limited to photos of their homes, uh, we that could be applied much more broadly. And eventually that turned into a platform where users share any experience that they value or that they appreciate in such a way that it inspires or informs similar experiences in the lives of others. So places that they go, things that they do, and the chandeliers hanging over their head as we had intended to do from the beginning. That was sort of like the product trajectory to how we got here. Interestingly, when we released the first version of the product, we had come into it based on this marketplace or e-com kind of like legacy idea, and we had a very transactional mindset as a result. We thought essentially any experience that somebody shares on a Plottable, somebody else can repeat, right? You can tap and buy or reserve. And what we ended up seeing is that a lot of the experiences that users were sharing were not that, right? They were not uh, commercial transactable experiences, right? They were things that were much more intangible and personal, failures, successes, people, environments, aspirations, inspirations. And interestingly, that ties unbelievably well to interests, uh, I would even say kind of like fascinations that I've had since I was as far back as I can remember as a kid. I've always been unusually curious about who people were and what made them that, right? How they got here. Um, what are the experiences that gave each of our lives shape? And I don't think we intended to build a platform that facilitated awareness and sharing of those experiences. Again, we came into it with a very kind of commercial, transactable mindset, but it was very interesting how things had gone full circle with interests that I've had as far back as I could remember, like I was saying, where the platform ended up becoming that. I mean, the common thread is users are capturing and sharing authentic experiences that matter. And on the one end of the spectrum, those experiences are, it's the things that fill our daily lives, places we go, things that we do. And those are the repeatable things, the transactable things. On the other end of the spectrum, which I find, even more interesting and inspiring, it's the things that make us who we are. It's the experiences that give shape to our lives, that give meaning to our lives. And what we found is that most of most of us have very little conscious awareness of those experiences. And as a result of that, we don't have appreciation for them and appreciation for the significance that they've had in our lives. And as a result of that, like our stories are shockingly untold. The experiences that mattered are completely lost to time and completely lost to history. So, yeah, long-winded answer, and, the third part is all of this kinda came together at a time where I guess where I started, where I don't think there's ever been a greater need for an alternative to the existing platforms that are out there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great segue. I think we would be doing this conversation disservice if we didn't talk about some of those issues, right? So I think like most people listening to the podcast, myself included, are generally aware of, what's going wrong with the social media platforms. You alluded to, impacts on younger minds, for instance, and, whether it's self-harm. I think Jonathan Hyde has popularized that quite well. Um, what are maybe some things that, I or other people aren't necessarily aware of? Cambridge Analytica is just popping into my mind as well, right? So sharing of people's data. But are there like other things that as you've been going down this path, have become aware of like, oh shit, like these platforms are even worse than what we thought?
Um, I don't know if they're worse than what we thought. I think a lot of the negative effects on mental health and attention spans and uh, you know uh,
Mm.
human connections that these things were intended to improve. Uh, you know, the reality of those things is pretty obvious, very well published, very well covered. Some of the stuff that we did find interesting is how aware users across the entire age spectrum are of these things as they're happening. We talk to 13-year-olds, and they understand that they're worse off for being on these platforms.
That's really interesting.
And yeah, I found that fascinating actually. And just like when, people are eating Doritos and they know it's terrible for them, but they don't stop. The same thing is happening with social media. And I would argue that it's probably at least with Doritos, you can, in theory, put them down and pick up a celery stick. With social media, there is no obvious, meaningful, positive alternative to the platforms that have become so, ubiquitous and common in our lives today.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Well, at least not yet, right? Or not
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
well
I mean,
aware. Yeah.
right. I think there's good reason for the intention behind what we're doing and others are doing. None of these platforms have become mainstream enough yet.
Mm.
Another sort of interesting, we've received unbelievable support from some of the most prominent social psychologists on the planet. And in fact, we're connecting with most of them based upon how outspoken they are about a lot of the platforms that we're referring to. And so we started connecting with them and saying, "Hey, look, this is what we're building. We'd love to get your take. We want to be very uh careful to not fall into the same trap that we're trying to resolve."
Sure.
And we received overwhelming support from really every single psychologist that we've had the opportunity to talk to. It's probably 60 or 70 of them by now. And one of the interesting kind of ideas that has emerged from those many conversations is the belief that if you keep the reward intact, but replace the behavior with something that is more authentic and more meaningful, that reward will perpetuate more of that meaningful, authentic behavior. The issue is that that meaningful, authentic behavior, at least in terms of how it shows up on social media, is a lot harder. It's a lot easier to take a selfie in a bikini and achieve the visibility and the significance that you're yearning and get the dopamine spike that, perpetuates more of that same behavior. It's harder to articulate some deep, meaningful personal experience. But we do find it very interesting. I mean, for one, there it's becoming a little bit easier, right? Leveraging artificial intelligence to elicit some of these experiences, using the examples of others who are sharing them to create introspection and comfort, um, is something that was a lot harder to do a couple years ago.
Mm.
And we find it kind of reassuring that as we get more and more users to engage in those types of behaviors, um, as long as they're seeing a reward for it, they're as likely to continue as they have been with the behaviors that have been harmful to them on some of the other platforms for, for a long time now.
Hmm. And so how I guess the question is, how do you enforce that that reward is happening? And how, like, maybe I need to understand your platform a little bit more, but like I would also assume that there's an opportunity or a possibility that it could be warped a little bit back to how things are being done now, right? It could be taken over, if you will, um, whether organically or not. Um, I'm assuming that there's some safeguards or the actual reward mechanism is kind of built in to avoid that. but I'm just speculating here a little bit.
Yeah, I think look, I think part of the reason why it's happening on these other platforms is largely based on how they're monetizing. And so very simply as predominantly advertising exclusive, not exclusive, but predominantly advertising revenue models. They are incentivized to keep users in feeds as long as possible, right? There's a direct correlation between how much time they're spending in feeds and the revenue being generated for these companies. Unfortunately, the things that keep us in feeds longest happen to be the very things that are most damaging to us. And so we've thought about, I mean, we're pre-revenue and will likely remain pre-revenue for the next couple of years as we
Mm.
grow the platform and improve engagement. But we've thought about how do we avoid getting to that same spot, right? And and we've come up with a monetization strategy that prevents uh, us from benefiting at the expense of users.
Mm.
Uh, and so y- a big part of the solution is figuring out a way to not be at odds, not have to not sacrifice the financial interests of the company for the mental health benefits of users, which is sort of the dilemma that a lot of these bigger, more established platforms are dealing with. And I don't think the problem will ever be solved there as a result of that, right? To solve the problem, they need to give back the revenue and they need to sacrifice the revenue. So we've built a commerce model which both adds value to users because when you see an experience that somebody else shared, we're facilitating the repeatability of that experience, right? So you could order the book or make the reservation. And so our monetization strategy is actually a value add to the user experience. But more importantly, whether we keep a user in the feed for 10 minutes or 20 minutes in a day or for 2 hours, we're we're not generating 10 times more revenue. And so we're able, as a result of that, to optimize the feed for things that are better for our users. And what we're optimizing for is impact. We're looking at how universally shared experiences resonate and positively impact other users? How many people are actually reading the book because you shared it, or going to the restaurant because you shared it? How many of them are enjoying the experience enough where they're out there, kind of they're posting about it themselves? A good example is just to kind of like bring this back to the real world. Most of us have gifted books or recommended restaurants to friends, and every time somebody comes back to us and says, "Look, I read it, I loved it," or "I went to the restaurant, we loved it," we feel really good about that. And so that's effectively the reward loop that we're building into the platform at scale. You're sharing an authentic, meaningful experience, and we're measuring the impact of that experience partly, or I would say even say largely when it's a transactable experience, by how many people repeated it and how many of the people, what subset of the people that repeated it ended up enjoying it enough where they came back to the platform and applauded it, which is what we call posts.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Um, I want to go back a little bit. You made one comment about, the experiences in our lives might go unnoticed. And those are, typically important things that create who we are. Is part of the goal of Applaudable to like help people become aware of those typically unnoticed things and then share those?
That you're spot on. That is the first value prop that we're delivering on is for uh, individual users on the platform, and that is improved awareness and appreciation of experiences that matter. I'm a parent. I tell my kids all the time, awareness and appreciation of the experiences in our lives is what gives them value. If you don't have that awareness and the appreciation as a result, it's almost like not having the experience in the first place. And yeah, by improving consciousness, we're we're creating the possibility for greater appreciation of these experiences, and that alone is extremely valuable. And then we're capturing and sharing those experiences in a way that have the potential to inspire and inform similar experiences in the lives of others. And then that impact, the measurement of that impact becomes a much more substantive reward loop than the generic like, which is the primary form of engagement on a lot of these other platforms. You
Right.
know,
Okay. Yeah.
sorry, I'll just add
No,
to
go ahead.
that. This is the problem that we're primarily addressing. The social media thing that's, sort of like the easy thing to point to as the problem has just exacerbated something that has been around long before social media ever existed. And that is that most of us are just missing or glossing over life, right? We're missing the conscious awareness of experiences that should matter, that we should have appreciation for in our day-to-day lives. We have almost no awareness of the, smaller ticket experiences over the course of our lives that collectively probably had the biggest impact in who we became. Okay, we think about, okay, we went to this school and we grew up in this home. Maybe we had some, important relationship over the course of our lives that we attribute part of ourselves to, part of our story to. But the myriad of kind of like experiences in the tier below that, most of us have no awareness of. I was building, one of the things that we're building on Applaudable is user story, which is effectively the collection and organization of all of the experiences that have contributed to our story, to our lives. And I had gone through it just as a kind of like a tester of the platform while we were building it a bunch of times before I realized I was 8 or 9 years old when I first decided I wanted to be a founder, an entrepreneur. And of course, I never even heard those words before. But I used to go to work with my dad at a restaurant supply warehouse, and I used to really look up to his boss at the time. He seemed like this large life figure, and I remember at 8 or 9 years old thinking, "Wow, I want to be like him. I want to have my own restaurant supply warehouse one day." And of course, as I got older, the 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 aspiration sort of evolved a little bit. I moved away from that particular business idea, but about 10 years after that, I left college and I started my first company, and then I've done that a couple times since. But
Mm.
I thought, wow, this guy who would have no idea, I mean, he's passed away, but he would have no idea who I even was, had this effect. I have had essentially no awareness of that, no appreciation of that. Of course, him specifically and figuratively are never recognized for
Mm.
that sort of experience. And to me, there's so much being missed there on both sides. There's such a huge void that I think very universally applies to the live to all of our lives. And so that's what we're addressing with Applaudable. Social media has just exacerbated that, right? It's drowned out the things that should have meaning more than ever with superficiality and toxicity and divisiveness,
Mhm.
uh, to the point where, we barely even know what's, real or not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. I mean, my mind's going in a bunch of different directions. Maybe I just want to clarify or get a little bit more tangible on how these unconscious or sorry, the lack of awareness of some of these events in our lives become, or how the platform helps that. So you've stated there's a storyboard, so you go through your life and then you can kind of become aware in that one process. The other thing that I heard was, as other people are sharing their events, that might trigger you to be like, oh, that happened to me. Is there another way that the platform prompts people to think about, like, I don't know, a couple different examples of, well,
Yep.
did something like this happen? Did something like that happen? And that helps people to become, because to me, it sounds like the unique aspect of your platform is obviously sharing the things that are meaningful and impactful in your lives. But if there's I don't know, trickiness or some difficulty in actually becoming aware of those things, then it kind of would limit the ability of sharing those important things that I'm starting to understand is kind of key to having a healthy social media platform.
The primary yeah, nobody's showing up to any social media platform and, sharing, uh, retrospectives, right? When I was 10, this happened, So the way we're doing that is through prompting, and there are 3 types of prompts. There are system prompts. We built this ladder, based, AI prompting system that asks simple questions and then builds upon them. Where did you grow up? What did you wanna be when you were a kid? And based on answers, it builds upon them. There are peer prompts where you might be prompted to ask a question that you think is perfect for your dad or your buddy, and so you can forward that prompt to that person. And then there are post prompts where you can see that these 100 or 1,000 people answered the question about what they wanted to be when they were kids, and that creates, of course, introspection, and you're able to contribute your own experience related to that. Um, but, I had an investor recently who's like a pretty private person, not on social media at all. And he said to me, I mean, maybe half joking, but he said, look, as I start to see all of your life stories take shape on the platform, I would feel jealous not having mine. And I think these prompts are designed to almost to play the role of like a Walter Isaacson, to to interview you through telling your life story. And I think there's immense value in that. There's immense value to connecting to your story and the experiences that comprise that story consciously. There's immense value to organizing it in such a way that it can be shared, long after we're all gone. Uh, to see the story itself or the experiences that make up that story resonate or impact the experiences of others. It's surprising to us. It's increasingly surprising to us how untold our stories are. We've got an endless stream of photos and videos in our back pocket, but there's no depth, there's no narrative to it. Um, and like I was saying earlier, to the extent that we ever had conscious awareness of the experiences that have been important or that have mattered in our lives or should have mattered in our lives, those things are completely lost into to time and history. My parents are getting older, and uh, I I sort of feel like I don't even know anything about my parents. I mean, I grew up with them, we're very close, but besides the big ticket items, they grew up in Cyprus, they moved to the US, they had 3 kids, they worked here or there. I don't know what my parents were doing in their 20s or 30s, what they were aspiring toward, who they were with, what they were challenged by, what they were having fun with. And they barely know anymore, and my kids won't know any of that stuff about them. So, yeah,
Hmm.
I think, I would be arguing the same value to what we're doing today, even if social media didn't exist. It's slightly more pronounced because of how problematic the existing leaders in social media have become,
Yeah.
and how I would argue things are getting worse on that front. But this is something that I believe, could have had a place in the world decades before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. What about, I mean, privacy and kind of data management, which is one of the uh, largest smears against modern day social media platforms. If I understood your business model correctly, it seems to kind of take care of that because you don't really need any third parties to buy up people's data. But if you could elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, look, for the time being, users have complete control of their data, both in terms of visibility on the platform. So we built a feature we call circles, which are effectively private communities. So you can capture experiences on the platform that only you can see. It's almost like a diary. You can choose to share experiences with specific individuals or communities, circles, or you can share things publicly. In all of those examples, you have complete control over when they are when their visibility goes away. You know, when you make things completely private, when you remove them from the platform altogether. And yeah, none of this data is being sold to any third parties.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And how about growing the platform? Because I think this is always a big challenge for
Yeah.
any, whether it's a social media platform or just business in general. But I think it's more focused for social media platforms. Like, how do you grow? Apart from coming on the podcast and sharing your story and the value of it, what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing there?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we're trying to build the next billion user platform. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes like thinking about it that way makes it feel, like overwhelmingly kind of heavy. The way we think about it is we need to deliver value at the lowest possible community or user threshold, right? Ideally, a user on the platform on their own gets enough value to stay on the platform. Like the first user on LinkedIn was happy to stay on LinkedIn because at the time, digital CVs or resumes were a new thing and they were cool. And so it didn't matter that they didn't have scale and density and network. We would stay there and we would update our digital resume because that tool was valuable enough in and of itself. So we think about aspects of applaudable in that way. We think, I mean, Life Story, for example, is the personal equivalent of that LinkedIn digital resume, and it's something that doesn't exist in our lives today. You touched on it earlier. The value of awareness and appreciation, which is a little bit more kind of evasive, or elusive rather. It's not, it's, it, it in and of itself might be harder to kind of, to feel the benefits of, but there are multiple aspects of the product that we have designed in such a way that they can create value in advance of scaled, dense community or network. That's one thing. The other thing that we're doing is these micro communities that I mentioned are designed to provide community or network benefits, but at the lowest imaginable community thresholds. So, um, we've built a community, for example, a private community because I have kids who play soccer, for kids that are aspiring to go pro.
Mm.
And they're sharing personal experiences with one another, struggles, coaches, resources. Um, if we turn that into a million user community, it would dilute the value of the community. The couple of hundred players that are in that community are essentially getting as much value out of that community as they ever could. The 100 people here that are exchanging restaurant experiences with one another, uh, is providing as much value as the community could provide to its members. Growing it effectively dilutes the community. So we're thinking about, I mean, you asked about growth, but this is a big part of growth, being able to retain users. I think most of these platforms fail because they work toward whatever the magic, number is for users and activity, but you don't get from 0 to that number overnight. And while you're working your way toward there, the bottom keeps falling out from under you because you haven't generated enough value for them. So Michael Chen talks about this concept of, they come for the tool, they stay for the network. We are finding a lot of the tools that have value in and of themselves, and we have designed network benefits to sort of be triggered at the lowest imaginable community sizes. And that enables us to go out there and grow the platform through building bigger communities or replicating the communities that we've already built. Um, in a way that compounds as opposed to, has us spinning our wheels because we keep losing the users that we have, that we've acquired in the past. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes, yes. Okay. One other question here. I have small and growing digital marketing department within my company right now. There's a lot of businesses that can't attract leads. They don't know how to brand themselves. All this sort of stuff. And I'm sure you've heard of like Gary Vaynerchuk, for instance. One of his main things that he's pushing for businesses right now is you need to turn your business into a brand, because in the next pick a number 5-10 years, the all of these smart home applications, you'll just be speaking to your home. We'll be speaking to our technologies, and they will be recommending the barber, the plumber, the I don't know, the landscaper, whatever it is in your local vicinity. And you're not going to be searching for these things anymore. So you need to be connected to these tools as the preferred brand. And then there's all this stuff that happens with that. How is your platform connected to that? To me, it sounds like it's a lot more, consumer to consumer, individuals to individuals, and maybe like the influencer type or freelancer type that has like their own individual services. But when it comes to B2B or just, larger businesses in general, are they going to find a place on your platform, or is it not relevant for them?
No, I think it's very relevant to them in a unique way. We believe that the most resonant, the most impactful stories are the ones that are authentic. It's not the ones that the brands come and tell us in their biased ways. It's the ones that their users and their consumers are telling about them. And so imagine, Nike, for example, is able to aggregate every experience that every authentic experience that a user has shared, not necessarily about them, but in the way that aligns with their brand values, in the way that includes their brand or their products. And they're able to aggregate those stories and use them to tell their own story. Um,
Hmm.
for me, and in fact, I mean, we'll do some advertising on the platform. We'll augment the commerce model that I mentioned earlier with some advertising in cases where there isn't an opportunity to transact. But we built a model we call authentic advertising, which effectively allows brands to come in and identify authentic user experiences that were posted on Applaudable that align with their brand values and promote it. So instead of Nike coming in and saying, here's our new great sneaker, buy it, they will take the post of the runner, finishing their first marathon, wearing those sneakers, and promote it. So from a consumer standpoint, everything that we're taking in remains, on brand for us, aligned with authentic, relevant user experiences as opposed to commercial biased content. Yeah, we think, um, as the noise increases, this opportunity to connect with the market more authentically uh, will be a difference maker for a lot of these brands.
Yeah, that sounds very much in line with what I think and what I keep hearing about, like where brands in general need to be moving, right? It's less about, as you said, talking about your promotion, and more talking about the authentic or the genuine benefit that your product or your service is providing to your clients and your customers. Very
And I think that'll we'll see the need for that grow in proportion with the progress and growth of AI, right? Things are becoming so artificial, so fake, if you will, that our need for, genuine, authentic, relevant connections, and experiences is going to, grow in proportion to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the what's the other term? The brain rot content that people are making with AI right now, right? It's diluting the internet, if you will, with just a bunch of junk, because it's so fast and easy to make. And as we get more and more inundated with this stuff, the desire for these genuine connections, for these genuine and authentic posts, is going to be ramped up, I think. And I think you guys are well positioned to should I say, like, take advantage of that, or offer that opportunity for people. Very interesting.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. Um, so looking at the time here, let's say you could wave a magic wand and your platform, replaces Facebook tomorrow. How do you think uh, the impact on individuals' lives would play out? Like, yeah, I'll leave the question there.
Yeah, I think very high level, there's an opportunity for us to experience life in a way that we're not today, in a way that we're missing today, on the one hand, and also to have our experience inspired, influenced, and informed in a much more deliberate way. We didn't touch on this at all, but we're, you know, we're largely products of arbitrary experiences over the course of our lives.
Love that.
And so we think that if we're able to connect users, people to experiences that matter, and we're able to share those experiences in ways that are relevant and relatable, um, we can live much more deliberate, present, you know, appreciative lives, which I think, I mean, is vastly different than the direction we're currently going. As humanity.
Yeah. Well, I also think, listening to you talk about the platform, it sounds like being grateful for your experiences is kind of built into what you're building, right? So not only does it help you become aware of the, um, shall we say, impactful experiences of your life, but then you can become grateful for them, especially if there's a little bit more social proof of those experiences as, oh wow, like that's actually really important. You might be glossing over that if there's no, shall we say, external or peripheral pressure on those things, right? It's just like, oh, that's an experience. But if there's actual people saying, oh, like that's actually a unique experience, that's an important experience, you might become a little bit more grateful of it simply by the peripheral pressure or peripheral attention that's being put onto it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we agree. There's kind of like this, you know, possibility for positive herd mentality here.
Yeah. So you mentioned artificial intelligence once or twice. Obviously, this is a podcast focused on the future tech and emerging technologies. Apart from what you've already mentioned, where else is AI playing a role? And uh, also, as AI is, ever expanding and ever growing in its capabilities and possibilities of what you can do with it, how do you see AI playing a role in your platform in the future?
Yeah, so the two primary areas that we are currently leveraging AI are in the facilitation of awareness, right? The eliciting of experiences. So we're using it in some pretty cool ways to trigger awareness, to help articulate the corresponding experience. And we're also starting to use it in some interesting ways for presentation and production of shared experiences, right? So we're looking at taking the different elements of a post, of a shared experience, which, can include photo, it can include video, it can include voice narration, text, and tags, and all of that in a collaborative way. So multiple users can contribute all of those things to a single story. We're looking to produce those in documentary style format, and we're leveraging AI to do some of that stuff.
Mm.
Looking, a little bit further out, we're looking at building agents that can help with some of the actions, can facilitate some of the repeatability. Today, the repeatability is possible just through the passing of information. You know exactly what book I applauded. I know exactly what restaurant you applauded, and I can go out there and kind of like repeat some of that stuff off platform. We want to build that into the platform seamlessly. When it comes to transactions, you'll be able to tap and purchase. When it comes to services, hospitality, et cetera, we'll look at using agents to to handle bookings, for example, to do some of the more complex stuff, to repeat experiences.
Right. And because you're essentially starting fresh, right? You don't have this platform that's already existing for decades now. I would assume it's perhaps a lot easier to implement or integrate those AI agents so that you can kind of leapfrog over the Facebooks and Instagrams, etc.
It's a really good point, and it's interesting that you brought that up. It's something that I didn't realize. We have one of our advisory board members who's uh, been part of the founding team of 4 separate unicorns,
Mm.
uh, and a decacorn.
Mm.
Made this point to me recently. Exactly that point. He said, they had tried to retrofit into one of their tech platforms, and they spent years trying to do it, and they were, unsuccessful in doing so. This is years ago.
Mhm.
And he made that point that we're so much more fortunate to be able to build while we have all these incredible technologies at our disposal than we would have been if we were trying to, apply them looking backward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the age-old benefit of, startups starting up. You have you can what is it? You can stand on the shoulders of giants and use the tools
Mhm.
around you, and the incumbents. It's going to take them forever, if ever possible, to implement some of these things
Yeah.
that people are just going to want to. Well, it's not that they're going to want to have it; they're just going to expect it. It's like, oh, why? Where's the agent? Where's the AI agent in this? Oh,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, no,
As you might imagine, my heart, of course, bleeds for them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure you'll be there at their funeral, right? Awesome, Andrew. Well, I see that the time is dwindling here. I think maybe that's a perfect place to end. So obviously, we'll have the website and your LinkedIn up on the show notes. Are there any other places that you want people to reach out or follow or sign up to your platform?
There's a good shot we're gonna be opening up a community round, and so we want to allow users to participate in the upside
Yep.
of what we're doing, and so we're close, very likely, to finalizing a deal with WeFunder, who will host the offering. So it'll be at wefunder.com/applaudable.
Okay, interesting. Perfect. Well, we'll have that up on the show notes. Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about your very interesting project. I wish you all the best. As somebody who's, as I mentioned, growing this little digital marketing department, the amount of shit that I have to deal with these platforms is daily. So I wish you all the best. Fingers crossed that it works out for you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society. They're simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast, it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.